City Council Work Session Part 2, Tuesday, November 10th. Approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second?
All in favor?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, any public comment? Anybody? I don't think there's anybody there, so we'll jump right into our first item.
Okay.
Turner Beach Municipal Utility Account Policy Discussion.
So this is a follow-up to the February 12th council session. Carolyn did a presentation, and part of that discussion was municipal water accounts that were metered but not being billed currently. It was the part of the larger discussion about the new utility rate model that was proposed to be put in place. And so tonight is a follow-up relative to that discussion. Carolyn's going to outline some of the accounts that we would be talking about and proposal to consider billing for those accounts. Carolyn, take it away.
All righty. So you ready to go to the next page there? As Karen said, this was kind of a follow-up from the back in February of actually 2019. And one of the items on the concluding slides was talking about the metered but non-billed accounts. And at that time, there seemed to be at least some interest from council about revisiting those. We kind of dropped them at the time of the utility billing process to kind of focus on that and then to come back to this. So that's kind of why we're back here today. And just to give you an idea of the accounts that we're talking about.
Next slide.
We grouped the meters into a couple of different types, and this is on page 3 of the presentation. And as the Public Works Committee talked about it, we kind of had two kind of natural groups. Those accounts that really are almost solely for the benefit of our visitors, and the other ones that are a combination of the benefit of citizens, visitors, and businesses. And so the first group for the benefit of the visitors really are the public restrooms that we have in town. It's the 3 main ones, downtown, West Shirley, and here in Midtown. And then the other list, we kind of grouped them into like type of meters. They're the ones that are in the parks that are used for either irrigation or hose bibs. There are what we call the utility service functions or facilities. These are the water usage, like the wastewater treatment plant at the public works yard, at the lift stations, the booster stations, and the recycle facilities. So those are all kind of like city enterprise fund type usage of water. And then there's what we call the office uses, which is the use that's here at City Hall, and then the use at the fire station. And all of these are metered, but they're not billed for their usage for any of these accounts. And just a note, in terms of state parks, both Ecola State Park and Tolawano Wayside, they are billed for water and wastewater, and they do pay for those services at those 2 state parks.
Okay.
And just to give you kind of a summary of these meters and the usage that each of these meters have, that's kind of what's on the next page, page 4. Because again, usage numbers are from the same data set that we did the entire analysis for the utility billing work on. We're talking about a total of about 40 meters. About 2/3 of them are 3/4 inch meters. The rest of them are larger. For this 1 year period, again, from the analysis period, the total non-billed usage was 587,200 cubic feet. And that represented about 3.5% of the total system usage of water for the year. And then we broke them down into the different categories. The public restrooms used 263,600 cubic feet, and that's about 45% of the non-billed usage is all being used at the 3 public restrooms. And then this goes down from increasingly smaller usage. The next largest usage is the wastewater treatment plant that uses about 26% of that non-billed usage. And then it goes down to irrigation of West Shirley and Main Parks, the Public Works Yard, City Hall, Fire Station, and then all others. And that is like the booster stations and the lift stations and the recycle centers, what goes into the all those. This just gives you an idea of where that non-billed usage is actually happening. Any questions so far? And just to kind of give you some theoreticals on how billing of these different accounts would work, where the money would come from and where the revenue would go to. For example, for the restrooms, they would be charged for water, wastewater, and actually for storm drain as well. This would be an expense to the general fund, most logically under the public restroom and litter, where all of the other expenses related to maintaining the restrooms are maintained. So that's where the expense would most likely come from. And the payments here would go to the water and wastewater enterprise funds, as well as the storm drain fund. So again, this is an avenue of providing additional revenue that's earned actually to the enterprise fund, but the expense would have to come from most likely the general fund. For parks, which is irrigation and hose bibs, that would be water use only. And since parks are maintained within the general fund, that would also be an expense to the general fund, and it would be a revenue source to the water enterprise fund. There'd be no wastewater on this one, or there'd be no storm drain on this one, since this is just like, this is an irrigation account. The utility service functions are a little more complicated. What you have here really is probably moving funds from one enterprise fund to another enterprise fund. For example, the wastewater treatment plant, the water that it uses, it would be billed to the water fund. So you would take money out of the water fund and it would go to the wastewater fund. So you're kind of moving between enterprise funds. When the Public Works Committee talked about this, we saw that as being, it's a revenue for the water enterprise fund, but the mechanics of how you would bill and transfer that and the amount of effort that it would take to manage that process going between those, we saw that as less clear as something, for example, that the restroom, that was a clearer path. But again, this would be transferring between mostly the enterprise funds. The city hall and fire station, if those were to be billed, they would be just billed as any other customer is billed and paid as any other customer pays. Of course, billing, the actual billing and payment, especially with the accounts that are totally within the city's purview, that is not the fire station. Finance would figure out really the best way to handle the billing and the payment, whether it be, an internal transfer, or if it would actually be a bill and then a check, city check going back to the enterprise fund. Lori and her team would figure out the best way to handle that for whatever ones that you choose to go ahead and implement. I think the key here is that it would be billing a function that is there now, like the restrooms, and it would be a revenue that's going to that enterprise fund. And as we had with the numbers on the previous page for the restrooms, it's a pretty big usage of water and wastewater. When the Public Works Committees discussed this, we kind of put the restrooms in one category, because those are really almost exclusively for the use of visitors, and all of the other accounts we put in another category. And we talked about the ones that on this next page where we recommended not to bill the parks and the utility service functions. We kind of were looking at, well, how complex would it be, for example, to bill the public works yard that has works for parks, and it's got works for roads and works for water and wastewater, and how would you manage that to split those expenses up between those different funds? And what percentage would parks get and what percentage would water get? We saw it was a little muddier there in order to bill that and to pay for that. Sorry, I gotta drink water, otherwise I'm gonna cough all over you.
Just administratively.
I'm sorry.
Just administratively.
Yeah, administratively, it seemed a little harder, and we weren't as strong in the thought of that is something that really needs to be billed. We were very strong. Everyone in the committee was clearly in support of having the restrooms billed for water, wastewater, and storm drain. And on the top of page 6, it kind of gives you a breakdown of what theoretically the cost would be to the general fund in order to pay those fees for water, wastewater, and storm in the 3 restrooms. And you can see the total there. Again, this was for the year that we studied. Is excuse me, just over $40,000. And a recommendation for the other ones was to not to bill them. And I'm gonna I'm going to pause right there to see if anyone has any questions and to take a drink of water.
What do you and the committee see as a significant advantage in billing separately the restrooms?
Well, one of the main things that we talked about was, and I know you can't use transient room taxes right now for this type of services, but the fact that those are not billed, it kind of masks the costs that the city actually incurs to support services for our visitors. And this is a pretty, this is a pretty good size amount of money that would be both recognized or realized by the utility funds, as well as it would be a hit obviously to the general fund. But by including that in the general fund for the public restrooms and litter, it kind of gives you a more complete picture of what it is costing the city in order to provide those needed services to our visitors who come here.
Well, and at some point, I'm thinking that the legislature might change the parameters of where the money goes, and maybe that would be, you'd be way ahead of the curve.
And that was, that was one of the points that we did discuss. Is that you really can't use that money for that now, but if more and more communities actually are able to demonstrate how much it really is costing to provide these services that are outside of the venue of using those funds now, this, helps present that as a more complete picture.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think that's a real advantage. It identifies a real cost
Mhm.
and under the radar.
Yep.
Now.
Yep.
Regardless how you end up funding it,
Mhm.
it's worth knowing what those costs are,
Right.
even if they still get funded the same way.
Right. And, that the discussion did happen in the committee about, well, where do those funds come from? And, there's always a lot of discussion about different ways to get revenue, the prepared food and beverage tax and all that. But we said from the Public Works Committee perspective, that's really not in our bailiwick, if you will, to make that call. But as a Public Works Committee, we want to ensure that the enterprise funds are appropriately funded, so the work that needs to get done for water and wastewater and storm drain can get done. And we felt that it was important that all of the users of those enterprise services are paying for those services. When you look at it from that perspective, well, maybe we should bill all of them, all of the other ones that we listed, but our committee was really strongest on the restroom, and the other ones they were kind of a little ambivalent on the other ones. But again, I'll go back to it would be a cost to the general fund, and that would be obviously that would be an ongoing cost in order to pay these from the general fund.
Those metered but unbilled, we're talking here.
Mhm.
Is anybody looking at the meter and,
Yeah,
and saying, oh, that's really a whole lot higher than it was last year or last month, or checking for leaks that way? Like somebody might, when they're paying the bill every month, it almost forces you to look at that. And when it's not being billed, I just wonder if anybody's really paying attention to how much is going through that meter and if it's varying much from what you expect.
I doubt anybody was looking at it in detail. I know when we did this analysis, we did look at the usage over the year, and as you would expect, when you get to the summer months, the restroom accounts go way up. But in terms of looking at them from month to month or even year to year, I don't think that really happens on the non-billed accounts. But you're right. I mean, if there was a bill associated with them, you'd probably, it's like when somebody has a water leak, all of a sudden their bill doubles, and that is a big red flag that say, hey, something's happening here.
Yeah, Laura would jump all over it.
Mhm.
So Daryl does look at those accounts.
He does.
He actually caught a water leak in the parks,
Oh, sweet.
park ones.
Okay.
So he does take a look at those.
Nice.
Those water guys do so much that we don't see. They're just
Yeah.
out there working away.
Awesome.
They are. So, our, as I said, our recommendation from the Public Works Committee is to build a restroom for water the restroom accounts for water, wastewater, and storm drain. And the reason we're bringing it to you at this time is that this is something that the council wants to pursue. It would be advantageous to have the decision now or very soon, so that as the staff goes through the budgeting process for the next fiscal year, they will be able to factor this in, because they'll be able to factor in what the expected revenue is going to be for those enterprise funds, but they'll also have to budget in the general fund or wherever you decide it comes from in order to pay those particular meters that council decides to bill for. Now, the only, in terms of the municipal ordinances, in terms of the water and wastewater, the only ones that are called out specifically now in the ordinance is not being billed is the fire station, that they don't get billed for their water. All of the city accounts, although they're not billed, those are not called out specifically in the ordinance. So the only one that would require an ordinance change would be if council chooses to bill the fire station for their water usage. And the water usage for the fire station does not include the water that they use for training purposes when they're taking water from hydrants. It's just the actual water usage for the fire station. It's the only one that's metered. If they're using it for training, that wouldn't be billed, and that's not even metered because that's going to be straight out of a hydrant typically.
But we do track it.
But yes, Karen does track it. They've found this way that they can, like, if they know the training has happened, they can take a reading before and after, and they can get an estimate of how much water is actually being used for training. And that just helps from a bigger perspective to understand as a city as a whole how much water we're actually using in total.
Do we have an agreement with the fire department that we charge them?
Do we have any agreement to not charge them?
Is there an agreement between the city and the fire district that says they get free water?
I don't know if there's an official agreement with them, but our ordinance actually says right at the bottom of the table, it says that the fire department is not charged for the water. So I'm assuming that means there was some agreement in the past that that would be the case.
I just want to make sure it was covered.
It is covered. As if that one is covered in the ordinance in terms of all of the city accounts. That's not specifically called out in the ordinance that those are not billed accounts. So that's kind of an internal policy in terms of those not being billed.
All right.
That's it.
Thank you.
Yes.
I guess the question then for us is something we want to move forward with.
Seems to me it makes sense to follow the recommendation here and bill for the restrooms.
Yeah, it sounds real proactive. Know what we're doing.
One cost that isn't listed here is what it would cost administratively to do.
Yeah.
To bill them?
Yes.
Well, we'd be talking about 3 different accounts if we talk just restrooms. So it would be an additional 3 accounts. I really can't tell how long it would, how much
Yeah, I'd
that
have
would
to
take.
have Lori answer
Answer
that
that.
question more than.
I'm sorry, I didn't need an answer right this minute, but I just thought I'd bring it up just to illustrate that it's not just $40,000 coming out of the general fund. There's also, I assume it's somewhat insignificant.
I would,
don't want to just
right.
guess that.
I think for bathrooms, it would be relatively minimal if we got into the rest of the accounts like we were talking about, where you're kind of playing a shell game. I think administratively, that would be much more extensive, and that's where I think it would be costing the city some money to be doing that. And like the committee said, for what outcome,
Yeah.
but the bathrooms were kind of a no-brainer, and I can check with Lori and bring that back to you for further discussion if you want to look at the administrative cost associated with it.
It seems like it would just be like anybody else signing up for water, just adding an account. I can't imagine. I guess my feeling is
It's certainly not going to change my mind from supporting it or not supporting it. I want to make that part clear.
Just curious about.
Support it. I just wanted to bring it up for discussion purposes.
if it's something significant, then we ought to be made aware of it. But it's like adding another account, I wouldn't.
So there'd be that billing portion, and then I guess in the budgeting process, Public Works would have to, come up with the appropriate number to include in the budget as an expense. And then when Lori figures out what the expected revenue would be, she would have to include that as part of that. But the fact that we have the usage, we already know how much each of these, it's going to be a drop in the bucket in terms of an effort. But
Would the bill then essentially never get paid or just at budget time moved once a year?
I would expect, and again, Lori will have to make the call on this. I would expect that there would be 3 bills that as you would get your water bill, a bill would go to the city, to the general fund to say, you got to pay this bill for water. And then it would be a check going back. She might decide to do it as an internal transfer. But whatever would be most expedient for her, I'm sure is what she would choose to do in terms of the billing payment process.
Well, if they don't pay, we'll shut it off.
I misspoke about that. I thought of that as just another way to cut down on administrative time, is just to have to worry about a bill being paid. If it's all done electronically, I suppose it's not really a big deal.
Okay, sounds like it's a go. So specifically for the bathrooms, not.
Right. Okay.
Would you like us to bring this back to you at another work session or a meeting? How would you like us to go forward with this?
I don't think
Doesn't require
it does. Do you think this needs some sort of formal action, or can we just do it at the budget meeting?
I think let us explore that. If we don't need to bring it back to you, we won't. But we'll let you know how we sorted it out.
There you go.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Carolyn, for keeping up with it.
It's the last time I'll bring anything to you regarding water and wastewater and sewer.
I hope not.
Yeah.
You always do such a good job.
PowerPoints, or it's just PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay, our next topic is the virtual meeting policy. Bruce?
Yeah, this is something that Rusty and Jen worked on to make sure that we had our procedures documented for our residents. So Rusty, I'll turn it over to you and Jen.
Most of the items that are in here are the process we've been using for a while. We have most of it on our webpage, but there's been some confusion. So we thought, producing this document would help. Basically, it shows the different methods that you can actually provide comment for the meetings. One thing that we have in here is to make sure that we get notification by noon the day of the meeting so that we can actually find the person on Zoom. You can do it in written form if you just want to make a comment, and that goes to the council so that they see that. They can actually provide comments via Zoom. And that's where I would need their information so that we could actually unmute them so they can speak. You can do it through phone. And then we have the traditional method we've been using here. If somebody shows up, they can do it. And that's all documented here. And then the second document runs through the process of how to attach. So again, most of the stuff's on our website already if you go to drill down to the individual meetings, but we'll actually put these formal documents and attach those to each meeting as we have them. So any questions about the process?
I have to make a couple editorial edits in this thing because it drives me nuts. I've copied some of this over on Facebook when I announced that there's going to be a meeting. On the first line, it says all public to be heard comments. Can't you just say public comments? Lowercase p for public.
Yep.
And agenda and non-agenda items, all that's lowercase.
Okay.
And then down at the third paragraph at the next to last line, it says, so your name will raise to the top. It should be rise to the top.
Okay.
It's my public persona. I have to.
That's great. We need that.
And then I have a question. It's on number 4, you have a graphic of a computer. But it says make a spoken public comment during the city council meeting in person.
I can change the icon. That's not hard.
And that's a little confusing. I think that's all I have.
Turn that into a stage with a microphone.
What's that?
Turn that into a stage with a microphone.
Yeah, there you go.
Scare the heck out of me.
That was-
Will the number always be 25 people? Is there a possibility that that might change
Hopefully.
That's per the governor, so
at this time?
change.
Okay.
We also did denote that public comment will be limited to 3 minutes in there.
See?
I was wondering if you could highlight that.
One of the other things we had was that you would actually do the agenda and non-agenda items at the beginning. So that's something that I don't know if you want to do both of those at the beginning or wait for the agenda item during the actual item. That would be something it kind of, if you're.
Kind of fluctuates, doesn't it now?
We'll make that decision at the meeting because some items are specific, but I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to say it, so at least they're aware of it.
And it does specify if it is a public hearing that it would be during that portion of the public hearing, not during public comment.
Right. No, I think this is very beneficial finally to have this clearly formulated now that we're technically more advanced, but
We're going to be doing this for a long time.
yeah, it could be a while.
Well, it's become part of our recording system and everything else, so it makes it so much easier to do it this way.
Well, and we get more people usually attending the meetings than we ever got before, so.
Yep.
Okay,
Sam, one quick question of Rusty.
Yes.
It's not on what you have here in the document, but for somebody wishing to get a recording of the meeting, is it now include the video?
Yes, it does.
Okay,
If you go back to the meeting pages after it's finished, I go in typically the next day and post the link. So everything goes to YouTube. And so basically you can get all of your recordings there as soon as I update the link.
great.
And is there a time limit on how long people can access those meetings?
I have not seen anything that says it will come down after any period of time, so I don't believe so.
Is YouTube the only place that you can get it, or can we request it from the city if it went that way?
YouTube is where everything is, but we can produce something if you need to. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I remember one time you were really nice and sent me a link when I couldn't get it.
okay. Thanks, Rusty. That's a lot of good work.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And Jen?
Okay, next item. Special events and outdoor merchandising ordinance amendments. That would be Jeff.
All right, thank you. You, at the last work session, had asked me to come back with 3 different things, and one of them was minor updates to some of the language. Then I promised you also a fees kind of comparison across some of the region and the state, and gave you a table of that. And then a draft of the handbook application. And so I've tried to give you at least a first draft of all of these. I didn't get as much time thanks to a few other items that have come up this month. But, you know, I try to get to at least some of that in the events fees across the state and region. One of the things I wanted to touch base on that is that you know, I just kind of looked at what I could find, and then you'll see in different jurisdictions, they do it a little differently in each one, of course, but really between $100 and $200 is about the normal range in most of the places I looked. You know, they range way up there for some cities, which I could not believe actually. And, but a lot of them tie in their facility usage within that. Some have, you see a growing thing for film where they're starting to look at that in some jurisdictions, or at least they may not charge for it, but they'll have you do a permit for that. And then one jurisdiction, Seaside, does outdoor merchandising as kind of a event type thing. And so there's different models for this, but like I said, most of them, they range for the specific event for $100 to about $200. Any questions on that, or?
I can just make a comment on Newport. They have that harbor down the Old Town area, that whole harbor district they remodeled and rebuilt
Yeah,
specifically for events.
yeah,
And I know they charge by how much of the space you use.
yeah.
So yeah, that's why that one's so cockeyed.
Yeah, it looked like to me, like you said, it kind of tied up in almost like a facility type use because you're charging for that area.
Would Seaside kind of come in at a similar number if you had that filled in?
Yeah, exactly. Like, their facilities, their convention centers and things like that. A lot like that.
And I would assume their convention center has its own fee structure.
Yeah. And then I did the kind of a rough draft of the special event permit and application. This is just a draft, and I put this a brochure type of thing once we'd have it. Be a plain text version if people wanted that, but, also kind of a workflow. I thought of maybe doing as some jurisdictions will put this in there, and then they'll put, how many days on for a minor, how many for a major, when you need it in and all that with calendar type thing. So some of that I didn't get really a chance to do, but at least I kind of got to what I would consider the application portion of it done for you.
Yeah, the application actually helps you sort out some of the language from the ordinance.
Outflow.
For the language, and you can really see specifics. I have one question on the site plan. We're just thinking of somebody that might not have a really big event, but didn't quite have computer access or wasn't handy at the computer, and you say a hand-drawn maps will not be accepted. If somebody were to get one of the city maps that has the site printed properly and then just did bubbles on top of that, would that be acceptable?
Sure, yeah, and that's what I was going to suggest is, I don't mean that we could even print out the site area for them and then they can draw on it.
Okay.
Like you covered the comments we made before, so.
To kind of show you in red the areas. The only one I did not finalize, or at least kind of make a final, is on page 9 of the language, inflatable. I hope everyone saw in Bruce's Kitchen had the turkey up this month or whatever was land. So this is to try to speak to that. I don't know how, in other words, that's really why we have that language in there. So it's just a minor.
I didn't understand on that. It says, one special non-movable inflatable or collection of inflatables, it gets worse instead of just one, or other temporary sign not exceeding 500 cubic feet may be conditionally approved and is not to be included in the total. In the total what?
And it's in the total signage area.
Okay, so you can have the other signs that
Yeah,
you mentioned beforehand, but
yeah,
this is in addition to all the signs.
yeah.
Not exceeding 500 cubic feet. How much is 500? That sounds like a lot.
5 by 10,
That's 50,
20 by 20, you know,
that's 400.
Yeah.
but
And, so I was kind of trying to estimate how big their turkeys and things like that are. And that's my guess. I don't know.
well, the question came to my mind is how do you actually measure that big a turkey by the pound?
I'm glad that's on the public record. How do you measure that big a turkey? Yeah, you just do kind of a square footage of it.
And then what do you mean by conditionally approved?
In other words, we would have kind of conditions to operate that under. We wouldn't, I don't know if the fire department or whoever, if it's a special thing that they may require, but at that size that I worked at St. Mary's, I think we had about that same size, 500 cubic feet is what we allowed there. And so we never really, it was not a problem, in other words.
And when you say non-movable, you mean not the ones that go.
Exactly. I put the non-movable because that's in all of our language, really.
I'm glad to see that because that's really distracting.
Or any kind of, I've seen the windmill type-ish.
Okay,
stuff
good.
like that.
I wonder if you could identify that by its footprint and its height.
Yeah. It could be a similar.
That's something measurable.
Yeah.
You can visualize. The cubic foot is
Yeah.
kind of difficult.
You can almost use the Candy Kitchen's little landscaping plot there that people.
Exactly. That's what I will. Yeah. Okay.
And then not to exceed.
Yeah.
So the non-movable would mean you couldn't have those awful men that kind of go back and forth like.
Right. Nothing like.
All right.
That one, I was thinking of when I read non-movable would be couldn't move it.
Oh, no.
Well, that's what I.
Motion would be a
originally
better
thought.
term, not
Okay.
motion activated.
I think we've used that for any type of, moving thing in the past, but yeah,
Well, motion activated
or motion activated. Yeah, I like-
Let's put both.
activated kind of means like a motor or something. I'm thinking of those horrible men that stand up there
Yeah.
and in the wind, they wave back and forth, like they'd have.
I know what you're talking about, and I don't want those either, and I
Yeah.
wouldn't. But this one sounded like one that was put on a float, and, take
Can you
down the
say
parade.
stationary? Stationary inflatable?
Well, the Wiggly
Yeah.
guys are stationary, technically.
Yeah.
That's why I think motion is a better,
What's that?
motion seems to be a better term for it or
Yeah.
something.
We'll just I'll try motion activated or motion. We have not had anybody try to skirt that issue.
Well, that's because people think they're illegal.
Mhm. Yeah, this is kind of a new thing.
I'm still not thrilled with it. Turkeys or no turkeys.
Anything else anyone could point out? If not, I'll bring this language back to you for one of the final work session touch. Are you guys ready to see it as
I think there was
a hearing?
something I had.
Okay.
I had something.
The two of them.
I can't remember. It's just.
I want to thank you for putting together the draft for the application form because it does help. And I know you're going to tweak the heck out of that over years and as things change, but.
And I'm happy to bring, even once we have kind of the full color version, bring that as a workshop item to you guys so you can have a chance to look at it before we put it out there.
I would almost ask some of the folks at the chamber to take a look at it because they're the ones that put on events and see if we're missing anything or if it's
Yeah.
convoluted or something like that.
I do have just a real minor editing
Sure.
thing. On, what page is it? Page 5, under exceptions to special permit, event permit requirement, number 8. It says a short-term demonstration by 50 or fewer persons should be that does not involve the use of a.
Okay, yeah, right, okay.
Find it.
And Jeff, where do people look to get a permit for a garage sale?
Garage sale is going to be online, yeah.
So it doesn't fit into this at all? Okay. And you can only do those twice a year, correct?
Yeah, I believe so. Residential, I think only in residential.
Okay,
Thank you.
any last comments on that? Okay,
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe.
thanks, Jeff. Next item, memorandum of understanding with Sunset Amateur Radio Club. Yerk?
Mr. Mayor, Council, thank you for letting me speak tonight with you guys and try to put some of this information out there and have some questions answered. I want to discuss the MOU with Sunset Empire Amateur Radio Repeater Network, or also known as SERP. Since I've been in the position of emergency manager, my top priority is to create a communication network inside the city for the ability to function with our groups inside, and then to also have the ability to communicate out of our community. It's a dynamic system that you need to make, but it isn't a system that has to be that challenging or complex. In 2007, that weather event that hit this community in this area, all communications were knocked down except for ham radio. And even the advances from 2007 to now, there isn't much difference, except for what's happening with the CERC level. A lot of people have improved their cellular systems and their satellite systems, but those systems can easily be underused, overpriced, and not function correctly. So we've been diligent about evaluating our technology, Rusty and I specifically, and we've been looking at all these programs that have been developed over the past few years to improve our technology. And some of these systems are unmanaged, overpriced, and not used. And so when you look at that price tag of that technology, it really is kind of staggering of what you're getting for that dollar. So we kind of started over and we started looking at what we were really doing and what works and doesn't work. And so we started to build a radio communication system. And when I started diving into this system, I am not a radio person, as in I know how to use radios, but I am not from that cloth. So when I started really diving into it, I realized this is an expensive adventure to start building this, especially on the public safety level. And I started getting some assistance from the people on the ham and the CERT team because they had subject matter expert knowledge, and they started assisting me with building this program. And that's where I discovered what Sunset Empire was actually doing. I had an opportunity to go out to all of the radio towers that they have up around the entire region. I was able to visit them. They invited me out there. I helped them do maintenance on them and see how they actually work and the work that they put into these things. And it was pretty amazing once I actually realized what they had developed for over several decades. By partnering with them, I don't have to start rebuilding our own system. I have to basically build a system inside the city, but I can use the backbone of their network to develop our technology and utilize something that's already there. It's a fraction of the cost, and it's something that we can use every day. The one thing that's interesting about what CERC is doing is a lot of the communities around here are tuned in, like Astoria, Gerhardt, and Clatsop County do utilize their system somewhat, but they don't understand what they're not using. And what CERC has been doing over the past decade or so is they've been bringing in internet from other locations. They've been bringing in voice over internet protocol technology and a higher level technology that is actually working on a basic level that is not something that you pay for every month. And the best part about it is it's not very hard for us to link our emergency operations centers, communicate with whole other counties and communities, and bridge the CERT teams and all those dynamics that haven't been done yet around here. And it's going to be on this backbone. The one thing that's interesting about the training that we've also done is the police and fire predominantly use radio systems, but nobody's incorporating and using them together with the awareness what everybody's doing. And that's really what an emergency operations center would do, would bring those things together, kind of like a dispatch. And then you start sharing resources, and then you start using things. And where I really saw that recently was the red flag event that happened just recently this year is I had Karen and myself in vehicles communicating directly with the fire department, and we were doing it via phone call and text. And that was working okay, as long as those systems were operating. But nobody had global knowledge of what we were doing because it's not on our radio. And the police department wasn't really utilizing the other resources, but at the same time, that's how they operate. They just operate in the radio. If you're not on that radio, you pretty much don't work with that. Another thing I found out was like the HRAP. HRAP is on the beach every day and they use the radios, but nobody's in touch with them. They're not connected to anybody. And my goal is to try to get everybody on the system and then use the CERC as the backbone for that. And the key is to really not reinvent the wheel. And when you see right there on the screen, which is in your paperwork there, you can see the radio towers, what they have of them. And right now, we're also trying to partner with our neighbors with KMUN and even in the forestry areas and improve the ham networks and the communication networks. So whatever happens on a bad day, this is an option for us and it's up and running at all times. I can read the entire staff report if you'd like to, or we can just take questions if you're ready to ask me some questions about it.
You got a question?
So this whole system would be built on ham radios?
Not necessarily. So they have their towers, their repeater towers, and they have internet at their repeater towers that they bring in with high frequency radio waves. And then they have ham systems. And the interesting thing about the ham is when I look at the GMRS repeaters that they're actually starting to put at those sites that we're going to use here, the GMRS kind of works locally. The ham covers everybody and can reach out globally. And then they can also bring in other things. And so they're not just using ham radio frequencies, they're using other technologies as well. Like how we would get the internet in here is it would go off the Megler Tower, go down to Arch Gates, and then bounce into the antenna that we're building off on the north side. We're in a little bowl here, and we're in this little dark zone here, and that is the backbone that's going to bring us all those services.
Do we have ham? I mean, the problem we had in 2007 was I don't think anybody here worked a ham radio. We had to wait several days because our satellite wasn't working at all. And so we had to wait several days before we could get a ham radio operator here in Seaside. And do we have people here now that can work a ham radio?
Not only do we have people here that are operating that way, but the tower that we're building on the North Tank site is going to have our own ham repeater and GMRS repeater. So we won't have to wait for anybody to come in here. We'll be able to operate right from this office. One thing that's interesting about the CERC team is they've also come in here and they've taught 2 ham classes for free. And they've also taught our CERC teams how to do GMRS radio training for no cost. And that's one of the value of those members that I never realized is that they're not charging for these impassioned things that they're doing. They're giving that out for free. All we have to do is be smart enough as a city to pay for the hardware and to kind of glean some of the knowledge of what these members are giving out.
I know the police radios have had problems communicating with each other and with Seaside, right? Does this help that problem at all?
It's part of the communications that they're working on for the 911 is a new tower up at the new school. And it's also going to be working on putting repeaters at the new towers that are coming in as well.
Good.
Yeah. And some of the training that we're trying to do is we have ham operators in the police department that are also asking for more training. And they're going to operate on this backbone network as well. In case their systems go down, that's the system they're going to use.
I heard you say paying for the hardware. Do you have any ideas about what that might be?
Absolutely. So we're still paying for the hardware within the city. And so all the equipment is going to be ours that we are paying for, and it's substantial initial costs. I had budgeted $30,000 this year to build our system internally within the city. And then some of the maintenance costs that I'm asking for that we put into their 501c3, put resources into there, is to maintain the system that's surrounding us, to bring us information in and allow us to transmit out. But the good thing about these systems that you're building is once you purchase this equipment and it's done correctly and done well, you don't have to pay for those things to be ongoingly purchased. It's just maintenance to be dealt with. So there is a heavy lift and a lot of cost initially to develop these systems, but as soon as you build them, then they just run.
The big part that I recognized was the folks that we're partnering with are all the expertise. They are bringing the knowledge that really makes the equipment valuable. So that part is very important. We could buy all kinds of tech stuff for all over the place, but not knowing how to use it properly is put it together and plug it in and all that stuff.
This looks like a very sound approach to taking advantage of systems that are already there. I have a question on the donation, kind of an annual donation. I can't remember in looking at the agreement how firm that was, or is this a one-time thing?
It's not a one-time thing. So what I'm looking for is a donation for them this year with the 501(c)(3) to get their maintenance costs and bring in some of the hardware on the outside of the network out of the city to bring it in. Then inside the MOU, and that's the value of the MOU, is we would evaluate their needs annually to support our systems from the outside, and then we would bring that to budget and review those annually. And so we would know exactly what their needs are and then be able to line item those things in the future and be part of the budgetary process.
Okay.
And is this weather resistant, all the towers and everything?
Well, not weather resistant forever. We had to do maintenance on them, and we were in a good rainstorm the last couple of weeks actually on some of these hills, fixing some of this equipment. They're actually very, very top quality stuff. It lasts for several years, and then you have to go up there and kind of maintain them and fix them. And that's what these guys are out there doing.
Rick, does anyone else in the county have an agreement like this with them?
Yeah, we had Astoria, Gerhart, and Clatsop County all have an MOU with CERC. And it's kind of my objective to make sure that I visit the other cities and let them know what we're doing, especially when it comes to doing the CERC training and the GMRS radio usage in those communities. They're not currently using those. We're trying to get them to also have the awareness of kind of what they're not using and what can be used at a low cost. But those are the 3 other communities that do have an MOU in the county.
Is this an MOU that they've used for other jurisdictions?
Yeah, those jurisdictions, and I ran that MOU through Ashley and her office, and she took a good look at it, and then we all got on a conference call together, and we tried to narrow it down as much as possible so it made sense to all of us.
Okay, looks like a go, Rick. We can't vote on it tonight, but bring it to us when we can.
Yeah.
Right, and we're, our goal is to identify where those funds would come from in the next month or so with Lori's office. So we'll make sense of where that's coming from to go from point A to point Z.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to what I can see is. Okay, flip over review determination for Jimmy appeal. Jeff?
Yes, I'd like to first kind of do a preface for both. This is it's a non-hearing item, so it's out of chapter 1788, public deliberations and hearings. So tonight's not to argue kind of the matter. It's just to simply set which of your 4 choices you want to do this on. The first choice is restricted to the record made before the planning commission. The second is allow new evidence and testimony on certain limited issues. 3 is a full de novo hearing allowing unlimited new evidence and testimony. And then the 4th is a remand to the Planning Commission, but due to the 120-day limitations, that's a pretty tough ask. And so 1788-180, the presumption is that an appeal will be restricted to the record made before the Planning Commission unless the appellant requests a de novo hearing. And 2, it meets the requirements in 1788-180. And so you have under that, the review body shall grant a request for a new hearing only where it finds that 1, the additional testimony or other evidence could not reasonably have been presented at the prior hearing, or 2, a hearing is necessary to fully and properly evaluate a significant issue relevant to the proposed development action, and 3, the request is not necessitated by improper or unreasonable conduct of the requesting party or by a failure to present evidence that was available at the time of the previous review. And so on that note, we have, I believe we have both Mr. Alterman on behalf of the Najimis, who wrote the appeal letter, I think is available if you did have questions from him, and then Mr. Hofsist on the second one. But we're targeting December 1st for the actual hearing, if the hearing is required. And Mr. Alterman has presented the letter of November 3rd, which highlights that he's asking for on 2 issues. 1, due to the height limitation and regarding the turret. 2, on the second item would be the common driveway area is a common shared outdoor living area. And any questions on that? Or
Well, he's just asking for those 2 points.
right, just to limit in other words, limit the discussion to those 2 items.
And yet we can still, as a council, say we want it based on the record. We don't have to open it up.
Right, exactly. Right.
I would like to see it be a de novo hearing. I don't feel comfortable making a decision with such a narrow scope and without reviewing the entire record. And if you want me to give you examples, I can.
And my feeling is we've been through this so many times and so long. And I went through the minutes, the record, the audio of the planning commission meetings. And from my perspective, there's enough information there that's been presented and the argument's been well laid out that I think we should be able to make our decision based on those 2 limited points. So
I disagree. I think Clay Newton had a good point about limiting 1 garage on 1 lot. I also feel that we should take a closer look at the outdoor living space. As far as the turret goes, I just had Googled turret, and what it says is the definition of a turret is a small tower that extends above a building, typically at a corner and especially on castles. The tall tower atop a castle where Princess Rapunzel lived is an example of a turret. I do not feel that a turret is a necessary item on a house that should conform to the 28 feet limit.
Arguing.
no, that's one of the items that
But I just feel that we need more in-depth discussion on this. Mike, I know you're tired, maybe you're bored with this,
no, we would.
but
we would
it's
have-
important.
We would have discussion on that exact item,
Mhm.
because that's been what's requested. Is to have a thorough discussion based on testimony and evidence that's been presented on that subject, that as well as the area.
Common open space.
Yeah, common open space. Those specifically would be discussed by us.
Right.
With all the evidence in front of us, without inviting more, what I think would be extraneous rantings about what's wrong with this and what's right with it, with no new evidence being presented. I just can't imagine, and the appellant has not said, I want to present new evidence that nobody had a chance to look at. There were good reasons. I mean, we ought to be just doing this on the record on those two items.
I have a question on his request here, Alderman's request. It said, on number 4, it says type of review appeal requested. It says on the record, this hearing on specific issue or issues, and he has that marked.
Right.
And so the specific issues are both the tower and
The building height tower.
and the driveway?
And the common open space, yes.
Okay, so those are the two specific issues.
Right.
Okay.
But not having a garage, 2 garages on 1 lot.
That was not what's been requested, right?
So I would like to open it up to that being an item that's very important to that whole project. I think the HOA, I think we all discussed this earlier, where we weren't going to go forward with it, approving any building until they had formed an HOA, and I'm not aware that they have yet.
They have drafted the language for that, and I was that.
It should have been years ago, so.
Jeff, can you explain to me what the difference between the hearing on specific issue or issues are on the record?
Yeah, so they're allowed to, bring testimony towards those specific issues, but not open it up to other, like for instance, the garage. If they want limited to those 2 issues, then you would seek just those 2 issues. You couldn't open it up for any of the other things that have to do with this.
And if there was a de novo hearing, it wouldn't talk, the hearing would not be about the planned unit development itself. It would be specifically for this request to build a house there, right?
Yeah, it's still, I mean, my original decision was to approve a building permit for the Najimi residence. That was appealed by Mr. Harrison, and my decision was overturned. And so, and then that, came with the findings that I presented to you guys. Now, Mr. Alterman, on behalf of the Najimis, has appealed that over them overturning that. But right, it's simply still about the the building permit, not about the plan development. I mean, that's what my decision was, the original.
And the planning commission overturned the decision based on those 2 items that have been presented here.
Well, that was their motion. Yeah, that was the main motion.
Yeah, their plan of motion was just on those 2 items, the height and the open area.
Let me clarify a little bit for myself, and again, on the record is only what was presented
Exactly.
at the planning commission hearing. Hearing on specific issues allows for some added or new information on those 2 issues.
On those issues, yeah.
And de novo is just open the door and let anything come in.
Right.
Yeah, and I follow up on that. If we did it on the record, there's a lot of information in the record. We limited it just to the items in the record that address the two items that have been discussed or that we're asked to look at. If it's on the record, can't we go anywhere into the record
Right.
to address?
Right.
Okay, so, all right.
So essentially, they're on the record and
Yeah, it's an on the
presenting
record.
effort on the specific items, the same thing. Whereas we can ask it, I guess,
Yeah.
nobody could bring new information on the record.
Right, but we can go anywhere in the record
We can do.
and not accept new evidence, new testimony.
I'm always hesitant to do de novo. That's just basically just starts the game off. Or other one of the two. we go with.
So at this point, we could listen to the planning commission meeting because we were advised earlier that we should not listen to it before.
Well, because it's before the council, so
Yes,
we have the ability.
Yeah.
So we would be able to hear it and do all of that.
I have all of that in already, as, I don't know if you've seen, but I'm putting that now, I'll have that available for you as a link. So you can just item off of that. You can look through that with, like you said, the minutes and all that. Okay.
Do we have
And
de novo, but
I would like to move that we do de novo hearing.
We can't make a decision.
Oh, I'm sorry.
not really.
So,
consensus here.
I'm sorry.
This gives the staff the guidance which way to go. So
No, I've already spoken my preference.
I would prefer either these two issues are on the record. I think I would prefer just these two issues.
Okay.
Brandon, you have a comment?
Yes. I would prefer it to be on the record.
Like I said, I could go either way. So on the record or on the issues. So I think, sounds like it's on the issues.
Okay.
So we would be looking at the record.
Well, yeah, you can look at the record, but we could also get new information on those two issues from
From the record.
Right.
I'm still concerned about the garage.
well, if the.
Because that should
Question.
affect that whole plan if, in fact, you should only have one garage on a lot.
That become part of the calculation on the open space, common space. Utilization of drive and square footage. I think there's a way to get to that. Maybe not. Yeah, I'm hearing two things. One is on the record, and I'm hearing others say on the record for these two items only.
Yeah, so
Those are two different things?
they are. So what we're asking for is if it's just on the record, you're just simply with the planning commission's record and making your decision from what's already been entered. If it's on those two issues, what you're allowing is for any new evidence can be presented on those two. Record. You always have the record on any of these we're talking about, but then they can provide new evidence on those two.
If we say on the record.
Yeah.
My sense is, an appeal is on the decision made by the planning commission.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What we should be looking at is why they made that decision. New information starts coming to us, we begin to shift and start looking at somebody else's argument, and we take it away from the fact that it's an appeal.
And it seems to me that it should be an on the record hearing.
I could go for that. I could.
On the record?
Because we can discuss all the stuff that was discussed by the planning commission. That's for us to decide whether the planning commission made the correct decision or not. By the information they were given. and
Okay.
Did they make the correct decision?
I really respect the planning commission and their decision, so.
Okay, let's go on the record. Last call on the record. Okay, next item was the
Offset.
offset.
So that's the, Mr. Hofstad's asked to allow new evidence on regarding trees. Trees was brought up at the planning commission, and Mr. Hofstad asked if we might want to allow a de novo hearing because of new evidence that he has on trees on the property.
That's why they have the trees rolling on the property.
Right, and at the hearing, the planning commission, referred to, that they did not want to see setback reductions because trees, too many trees would be taken down, or the trees, and he says he has new evidence that would show that not asking for, a lot of trees to be taken down.
How big is the house that he's wanting to put on the property?
800 square
An
feet.
800.
I think it's 800.
800 total, or
Yeah, I
is it
think-
2 stories?
Yeah, it's a 2-story. Yeah.
Okay, so that's
1,600.
right.
Well, I don't know if it is 1,600. I think it's not.
It's not a full 2-story.
Yeah, it's kind of, let me see. I might have that right here. Yeah. Yeah, it's not in the findings.
Now, my same argument falls for this one because my sense is an appeal is specific to the decision made to you. But if the applicant is, in this case, providing substantially different information, my understanding is it's not easy for an applicant to kill this one and start with a new application. Because we have time limits and stuff like that.
Right.
That's why this appeal kind of comes in this manner. Asking specifically for this know-how, because they do have new information. In this case, we are looking at something that might have this one confounds me because it's just the appeal aspect of it is different.
Yeah.
Should it go back to planning commission with new evidence?
This would be more of a case to me in that sense, but we have a timing problem whenever we have an appeal, which makes that whole remanding issue moot.
It really does. And honestly, I would ask if Bill and Ashley, if we can remove that, because I just don't see that it's possible within Oregon's 120-day rule. I mean, because of notice and everything that we have to do, I don't see how that's really inapplicable anymore. This was probably written prior to that 120-day was, put through.
Or if the applicant, which this is possible, waives their
They can, yes.
right to the 120-day appeal.
And we've had that, in the past, breakers, I think, for once.
Have been approached in this case.
We haven't, because we didn't know if that was.
Why does he have new evidence about trees now? Did trees just happen to come up in the planning commission hearing, and that was the decision, and he
Yes.
kind of caught flat-footed without
Well,
information about trees?
the trees came up and became kind of an important point, and I said in the hearing, you know, would it be okay, or would you guys consider tabling it and then he can mark the trees that would have to come out and they dismiss that? And so I think that that's where this, you know, wanting to provide that to you guys is where that came from.
So in reading the testimony that commission is saying that the trees are part of the view, everybody, they're going to cut those trees down, and therefore one of those qualifiers is that you're not impacting others' views.
Yeah.
And it looked to me like they cut down the trees and build a house, which that happens all over town.
Yeah. Well, you know,
Can we say it on the record, but we would accept this additional?
a single issue. Yeah, it's your decision. You know, he's requesting, you guys make the decision of how you all want to handle it.
What Brandon was saying, though, that for the applicant to waive it is actually to his benefit. Because in this case, because taking it back to the planning commission with new evidence still gives him the ability to appeal to us. If we go straight to us, the next possible appeal would be Lubbock, which would be dramatic. And I don't think for a few trees, whether that would be something you'd want to do. So I would, right now, I like what Mike was saying is I don't mind looking at it, but I would sure broach that subject of the waiving for him.
So if I, you know, forward that to him as an option, a remand to the planning commission, but offer him the single issue approach to you guys, is if he doesn't accept that, is that okay with you guys?
That sounds good to me. Yeah.
Okay.
That by single approach, that
One
new evidence.
limited issue. Yeah.
But
Okay.
still look at the whole
Okay.
information. Okay.
Thank you.
Jeff, may I ask just a simple procedural question? On the fee schedule, you could either pay $200 for on the record or $400 for a de novo. What does it cost for a hearing on a specific issue?
Yeah, you know, that came up actually when you said, we were actually saying, you know, this is really kind of the first ones that, you know, since I've been here, really that I can remember where we were in that middle one. And yeah, I think we just go with the lower one, what we go with.
Okay. All right.
Okay, that,
$4 is the meeting point.
Okay.
thanks, Jeff. And we will move forward into the discussion and anything for good of the order.
Yeah, Sam?
Bruce.
I think
Yeah,
we have,
thank you.
oh, go ahead.
No, somebody else wants to go first. Go ahead.
I think we have coffee with the counselors next Monday, don't we?
Yes. And then we talked about moving the next two meetings back, right?
Yeah,
Is that right, Jen?
January, February, we were planning.
Or January and February?
we didn't know whether we'd go to the fourth week or the second week, and it doesn't make that much difference to me, but
It doesn't to me.
You guys.
Or say the fourth week.
Sure.
Okay, so for January and February, we'll do the fourth week.
All right, coffee with the counselors, so everybody come. Well, everybody zoom in, except you guys.
Okay, Bruce?
Yes, thank you, sir. I have two items. The first is that the city has secured a grant. And I would like Rick to give you a short discussion on what that is. And what we wanted to do tonight is to let you know that we'd applied for the grant, that we received the grant, and wanted to make sure that you had no problems with us moving forward with continuing the grant. So Rick, would you give a short synopsis?
Yeah, last year I wrote a grant in December and turned it in January, and we were awarded, so I'm pretty happy about that. It's for $34,500 worth of freeze-dried food for our catch sites.
Ah, wonderful.
It is a matching grant, so we have that budgeted, that fund to match that grant, but we're real happy that we got that much awarded for something like that.
Great, good. How long does the food last?
25 years.
25 years.
25 years.
Ew.
That 25th year, it's.
We probably won't have to worry about it.
Congratulations. Thank you.
Well, we'll take that as a yes. And the other item is I sent you an email today about moving back towards virtual meetings. And there's a lot of issues trying to go ahead and sort out in, you kind of dealt with one tonight with the scope of review discussions, is that these tend to have a lot of participants. And so you can imagine probably most people would prefer to be here in person when those things come up. And so we're trying to make sure we don't have any due process issues if we do work towards having the meetings be totally on Zoom. So we'll keep you posted on that. But for right now, we would like to get more towards where we were probably about several months ago. But it's just that we're so busy in the planning commission right now that it may not be that easy to do. So we'll keep you posted. Those are my items, sir. Thank you. Y'all look locked up, but I'm moving still.
Meetings, maybe some other folks won't be doing meetings or gatherings. The governor has stated for not a direct order, but she's asked people not to gather in their homes for stuff like that. So it's getting a little concerning, but we're not quite there yet. So let's just be ready for it, right?
Mhm.
Right.
If we just had some air circulation in here, it'd help.
That would help, yeah. There we go. Okay. Last chance. We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you.
That's all.
Giving him a hard